Hello and welcome to episode 62 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Benjamin Dunks. Benjamin, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Really well. Fantastic being here talking to you today. Thank you for
Amazing.
inviting me.
There's some really interesting topics that I cannot wait to get involved with yourself. But first, and as always, Ben, in your own words, what makes you a man?
So I think what makes me a man is a whole combination of things. We've got all my life experiences combined with all that genetic predisposition that I've got, in terms of the choices I've made and the actions I've taken. But I think, and particularly, I think it's pertinent to what you like to focus on in terms of mental health. I think what makes me a man is how I view all of those choices for myself and about myself, how I view them in terms of regret, in terms of all those elements that kind of make us then make actions in the future. I think that's probably the best way for me to think about what makes me the man I am.
And how do you sort of compartmentalize those things?
I try to be kind. I look back a lot of different things as objectively as I can. I've made some interesting choices. I've had a very eclectic time of my life in terms of the decisions I made for work and what I've done, which I'm very pleased with. It means I've had what I consider to be quite, I think, an unusual journey. And then those things that I feel stupid about and wish I'd done differently, I just choose to view them differently and view them as possibilities for different actions in the future, rather than making me sad or depressed about something I can't change because it happened in the past. It's an ongoing dialogue with myself, really. I think that's the other aspect of this question. It's like trying to put your hand in a moving river. It's like it's just always changing, and I think the stronger a relationship you have to the idea that you can't pin it down, and that you're comfortable with the change of the conversation every moment of the day, then that makes it easier too.
I think a lot of men have made mistakes, have made decisions that they might not be proud of, or potentially, we'll use the word regret, but it's how you sort of deal with those in the future. We'll obviously touch on this in a second, but I was part of a conversation around the White Ribbon event, the violence against women and girls, and it was around positive male role models. And one of the sort of narratives was that because we've done stuff in our lives and we've potentially done stuff that's questionable, we find it really hard to have a narrative or have a voice when it comes to other men in the space and sort of saying things, because it's a bit like, well, I did this, so I can't say that, but really you should say something. So it's an interesting way of looking at regret and compartmentalizing it a little bit more effectively, shall we say, rather than taking it personal, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And into that violence against women and girls space, there are a lot of perpetrators out there who have a great deal of regret and want to change. But and there is an embrace. I think we have to embrace those men and support them in that process of change. Otherwise, you spend your life being cancelled or destroyed by something that you may have done once, or that you really know that you shouldn't have done, or you have regrets for. And if there are actions that you should be penalised for in significant ways, then that should also be the case too. But we do live in a culture of sort of instant cancellation for historic stuff, and I don't think there's a small amount of that historic stuff that should be taken to court, but when it is there, it should be. But for the rest of everybody who has done things that they wish they hadn't, we need to find out for ourselves a path forward and support from each other.
Yeah, I think it's about, you summed it up nicely, which is the present, right? Living in the present, for sure. For me, that was a little bit of a perfect segue. So it'd be really good to have a little bit of an understanding of what it is that you do within the men's space.
So I do a lot of work with schools, boys and young men. I have written 2 books, one called Intimacy, A Guide for Young Men About Sex, and another one called Men and Menopause, A Guide for the Bewildered. I've My background is in dance, so I was a science student, and then I decided I wanted to be a professional dancer, having never danced before in my life. Did 3 years of pretty hardcore dance training. I'm Australian as well. I've been in the UK for 25 years, and I moved over here to work for dance companies and to perform, and I've stayed ever since. Got married and have a stepson, and very happily here. But I had a youth dance company for a number of years, and some of my older girls were talking one day about boys in relationships with their friends asking to do things intimately that they weren't happy with or they hadn't consented to. And I didn't realize that this was actually a thing. And they basically told me to wake up, Grandpa. This is a reality of relationships in the 21st century. So what I discovered was this the incidence of in relationship sexual assault that was happening with our young people. But I also found that, well, to me, the conclusion, very quick conclusion, was that 24-hour access to pornography has completely skewed our young people's intimate lives, particularly our young men, and the actions of emulating that was drawing them into violent acts. But I also became really clear to me that there was no offering to our young men about what an intimate life can be, how fantastic an intimate life can be, or a different philosophy of what sex and intimacy can be. So the premise of my book is that if you focus on your partner's pleasure, you won't assault by default by emulating porn. And so I put that out. I self-published that. There are very few publishers around the world who would be happy to publish that book because it's very frank. It's very Australian in terms of its directness. It says it like it is. And actually, the amazing thing was that, and I kind of wrote it for mums, with mums in mind, because I knew mums would buy it for their sons. Some dads have, but it's been mostly mums who I've had feedback from. And then from that, I was invited into a lot of schools. I've done a huge amount of education work across all ages. So I was invited into schools to talk to boys, talk to girls, and actually really starting to do a lot of work talking to staff and talking to parents, because this is a global societal problem. It's not a boy problem. It's of an all of us problem. We have a 21st century, 2024 life, almost 2025 life that we're still, as adults, are still viewing in the 20th century, and we're just not wrapping our heads around the challenges.
We talk a lot recently about my experience as a teenager, or that sort of early, like 11, I guess, is when you receive your sexual health or your sexual study or whatever, that tick box that most schools went through. And it's lackness, it's shortness, it's simpleness. Don't rape, wear a condom, see you later. Like, that was pretty much my sexual education as a young lad. And I will actively admit that the majority of sex and the things that I understood to be sex were through pornographic images. That was just where I found it. This is, I mean, I might look young, but this was a few years ago. So how has that changed now?
Well, I mean, okay, so imagine that you're that 11-year-old self. You're coming into that PSHE lesson now.
Yeah.
But imagine that as your 11-year-old self, since you were 9, you've been watching 5 to 10 hours of pornography every week on your smartphone. So you're bringing hundreds of hours of experience of watching porn into a PSHE lesson. It's changed the way your brain's working. It's changed the way you're thinking about yourself. It's changing the way you're thinking about girls. It's changing the way you're thinking about female teachers. You're seeing things that, frankly, some adults shouldn't be seeing. And so you have no capacity to deal with what that is in terms of the actions that you're seeing. There's a study, it's an old study now, but it's still worth mentioning because I think it's actually worse, but that was from 2010, that showed that 88% of online pornography was violent, physically violent. And then the number that is really startling for me and sort of defines all the problems that we've got is that in 96% of those films that were viewed to be violent, the women involved were displaying pleasure upon receiving the assault that they're receiving whilst in the film. So we've got this situation where young men are seeing violent films, and in those violent films, the girls are expressing pleasure at being assaulted. So the guys think they need to assault the girls because that's what sex is. Girls think they need to be assaulted, that have to accept being assaulted as what pleasure is. And essentially, we, as the adults in the situation, are absent. We're not talking about sex to them. We're not discussing the reality of it. We're not saying, we say to them, and I've had boys shouting at me in my sessions, and in extraordinary frustration, and real hats off to them for having the bravery to do it. I mean, with one, I had half the year 10 class, so about 40 lads, and one lad just stood up and said, "What is real sex?" Arms outstretched, shouting at me, "What is real sex? All of you adults tell us that porn isn't real, but no one tells us what real means. No one wants to talk to us." And it was such an extraordinary frustration because we're just absent, because we don't know how to talk about it, because we don't know how to deal with a 12-year-old who might have actually seen more sex than we have experience in doing in terms of some of the actions and activities. So it can be super intimidating.
I think that's a big problem with a lot of narratives towards boys, right? It's all about not what to do. There is no guidance on what to do. Like, don't watch Andrew Tate, don't watch porn, don't abuse your partner. And they're just like, oh, well, you're not telling me anything. These people are telling me something. So
Yeah.
what do you think, or is it something that you offer? What is missing in that space?
Listening. I mean, we have what a lot of people describe as a deficit model towards our young men. And I mean, this has been going on for years, but it's becoming more and more enhanced, I think, because of all of these elements of the online world. That's also giving us this sort of binary idea. I mean, our online world just give us such binary ideas. And what I was talking about at the beginning in terms of a conversation that there is no answer to. So many of these questions have no answer. They just have eternal conversations that you're sort of bending and flexing with. We just have this deficit model of young men. All young men are sexual predators in waiting. All young men are going to stab somebody. If you see a group of 5 boys in hoodies on a street corner, they're going to assault you and steal your phone. It's endless. But what we completely stopped doing is listening. It's just shutting up and listening. Ask a question. And what I find in my sessions with these lads is I open a question out, and or they become very clear that they can talk to me in ways that they can't talk to teachers. And I'm very aware that I have a real responsibility in that way. The teachers can't have the conversations I can have because they have their teaching relationship. So when they suddenly realize that they can talk to me openly, there's no judgment, and I'm going to listen, they just don't stop talking, and because they're just not being listened to. And I'm not throwing any shade on teachers or parents or anybody else. It's just they don't have the time, a lot of the time, to be able to do this. But then there's just an assumption that there's a problem.
Yeah, I think putting additional pressure on teachers is not great. I imagine trying to roll out a resource like yourself is quite difficult, especially in a government-funded world where education is essentially free to the masses. It must be tough to get that out there. One thing I sort of want to... Sorry, go on.
That's all right. And it's also how prepared as the head teacher and the senior leadership to go. How far are they prepared to go with these conversations? That's a really big one that I find, is that you have some senior leadership who just are so scared of being on the front page of the Daily Mail, head teacher allowing explicit conversations about sex in their school. But then I have other head teachers who are begging me to basically talk through my book to their sixth form, because they know that that's what they need, and they're prepared to be responsible for that decision. And the difference in the school is almost immediate. When I have these conversations with the boys, the staff understand the level of these conversations. And the great thing there is that my book and the conversations with me has supported this head teacher in having those conversations herself. So she's the one who's actually leading a lot of these conversations with girls. And then we have an openness in that sixth form, in that particular school, that is extraordinary. And so then your incidences of harassment drop, your incidence of sexist behavior drop. All those behaviors that we're trying to wrestle with just diminish because we're having open and honest conversations about stuff that nobody wants to.
Do you think it's tied to self-respect as well?
I think it's tied to how our online world is defining self-respect for these young people, or is telling them how to define it for themselves. Absolutely, what they're seeing is in terms of their understanding of self-respect. What they're being told is it is to be a man. What they're being told is what it is to be a woman. What yes. So yes, it is, but this generation are being defined by algorithms and that are essentially dopamine delivery systems that are sending them down rabbit holes that I just think we haven't spent the time really understanding the consequences of.
I mean, it's a minefield out there. I think just before we hit record, I was talking to you about my experience with X as a new user, essentially, a male user, and constantly hit with threads on how to pick up women, how to please women, how to manipulate women, essentially. Why is this all getting so much traction, yet things like your book are left in the shadows?
It's a $1 trillion question, and I think that's it, because this is the stuff that makes money, because it's exciting, it's binary, there are a lot of guys that are really struggling, and it's really legitimate. Mental health for men across the world is diminishing. The biggest danger to an under 30-year-old is themselves in terms of taking their own lives. There are a lot of challenges, and our male role position in terms of society is changing rapidly, and what these guys are offering is a sort of singular answer to that, which is to push back hard and try to bring those male roles back, and that makes money. That's a really simple answer. Again, it's a binary. It's a black and white, and guys jump on that because they think that's the answer. Because actually chewing through the problem of in between it and trying to have the conversation where there is no answer is really difficult. I think it's money. It's clicks. It's dopamine. It's exciting. And then when you have young men who are looking at this stuff and they're being told not to look at it, it's like the porn thing. It's transgressive, which means it's exciting. When I'm having conversations in a lot of schools about not shutting these conversations down, or saying to somebody who talks about one of these influences that it's wrong and it's bad and don't say that, because that actually just validates the idea that they're going to get cancelled for saying this stuff. They're being told that if they say it, they'll get cancelled. Go into a school or a parent shuts it down, they're getting validated. So I'm trying to have conversations with schools and teachers where actually be interested, talk through the philosophy, ask where the information comes from. Let's have a conversation about it, because it's a house of cards. It doesn't stand up on anything. And actually, what I think a lot of guys is happening with a lot of guys is that we are being punished for the privilege that we've had, or a lot of young men are being punished for the privilege. Punish is probably too strong a word, but there's a societal change that's happening that's taking away a lot of the privilege that we've had, and a lot of young men are actually don't have that privilege. So then they're kind of going, I don't have this privilege that's now being taken away from me. So there's a real confusion, and I think we're just going through a seismic shift in terms of our society, and the answers that these guys online give are simple.
Yeah, I think punished is the right word. I think not many people benefit from a patriarchy. I think 2% of people have always benefited from a patriarchy. Those 2% of people probably still benefit in some way, shape, or form in society today. I mean, going to war and all of these things that men have done for hundreds of years is not, I wouldn't call it privilege. I mean,
No.
the majority of men are cannon fodder and have always been. What's happening is the middle classes are now being affected by it too, which is not what used to be the case. And there's a ripple effect around that, for sure.
And some of these, I've seen enough of this stuff. The footage where a guy's interviewing women as they're walking down the street and says, "What do you need a man for?" And these young women say, "Nothing. Don't need men. Nothing. Don't need men." They're put together in such a way that of course it's going to get a rise out of guys who are feeling vulnerable and who are feeling in challenging places. It's just, but the reality is that we don't have our roads or our buildings or our military or all these sorts of things that guys have always done. It just doesn't exist without blokes. So there's that reality in terms of what guys have done forever versus then this online content where young women are saying we don't need them, and that's just just creates this discord and just plays on people's vulnerabilities.
I guess on women within this conversation, a lot of sexual assaults are deemed as power moves. They're not usually sexually motivated. That's just the way that the power is sort of put on to the party involved. And you talked about listening a lot and having sort of open conversations. What is needed in regards to the girls in these conversations as well? Because obviously they're also exposed to these sort of materials and also from their future and potential partners.
That what they're seeing is not what intimacy is, and what they're seeing is not what an expectation should be. And actually, we really miss the conversation across our society of actually what pleasure is and what intimacy can be, and particularly with our young people. And I think there's a fear that if we start talking about actually a really fantastic sexual life is pretty easy to do and pretty easy to have. You just have to be focused on your partner, be vulnerable and understand what they enjoy and they understand what you enjoy and share it between you. It's and there'll be fumble fests and sometimes it won't work and sometimes it'll be extraordinary, but that's also a kind of a continuum. But I think if we started to have the conversation about actually the positivities of a fantastic sex life, but an intimate sexual life, I think that's the start of a conversation. But again, nobody wants to be the person on the front of the Daily Mail being outed for talking about the pleasure of sex to 17-year-olds.
It's so weird that that's the fear, yet as soon as they're 18, they're deemed as adults. It's this weird, well, we can't talk to them about it yet because they're not old enough to understand it yet. That's when we go through certain changes. So obviously your other book touches on the menopause, which is further down the line, but that sort of pivotal age of 12 to 15 where we go through puberty, both genders, there doesn't seem to be that. Surely should be when the conversation's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's PSHE, those conversations happen in schools, but there's a limit, and they're short sessions and they're not regular. And also, they're challenging subjects for, somebody who's spent their training to be a maths teacher or training to be a science teacher, and they're asked to get up in front of a group of class of year 8s for an hour and talk about pornography. It's not what they're trained to do. And they do an incredible job. Like really, they do an incredible job. But it's tough. But we're also in this weird world where we have 24-hour porn access to everybody on our. But I can't sell my book through Meta. I can't it's like this. Or you can't talk about this stuff. So sex positive therapists, sex positive workers, educators can't advertise. They can't. So the so-called freedom of speech conversations that happens with so many of these tech companies, it doesn't exist when it comes to sex, and it doesn't exist when it comes to they have Pornhub and all these YouPorn, you name it, all these sites on their websites. But when it comes to sex positive educators, they're actually mostly banned from talking about this stuff. There's so much little that you can talk about on LinkedIn. There's so little that you can talk about on Facebook. So we have access to porn, but in terms of the wider society, we're not allowed to talk about it, and then that feeds into then everybody else not being able to talk about it.
Why do you think that is?
I'm trying to rack my brains. I think societally, we don't want to talk about difficult and uncomfortable things, and sex has become a difficult and uncomfortable thing. It's been, I think there's definitely a massive Christian heritage to that, and a restrictive Christian heritage to that those decisions. But we're not good at we're not good at stepping into challenging conversations, and this is one of them.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, was like, it's okay to talk about sex when it's free and there's no sort of strings attached to it, but it's a bit like you never ask how much a man earns, you don't ask about politics, you don't talk about sex. Is it like, is that the world that we're still sort of
Yeah,
living in?
yeah, yeah. We don't want to talk about death. We don't want to talk about all these things that make us uncomfortable. And I think with our talking to our young people, we again, it's the I'm worried that my young person has seen more than I know, and actually there's some of the responses from parents rightly has just been bewilderment and anger at their child for watching this stuff. And I keep trying to say to them as well, don't, you can't bring anger and shame into these conversations. You have to, it is their fault that they've clicked on this stuff, but it's not their fault. It's out there for to be seen. It's out there to be accessed and to be experienced. So it's us. We've made the decision to allow this stuff into our lives.
Will you look at platforms like TikTok and Instagram Reels, this, like you said, this dopamine hit of just constant feed of stuff? Even those platforms have become significantly more sexualized over the years. I remember when I first got Instagram and it was photos of the river with a really horrendous filter over it and many hashtags, whereas now it's OnlyFans girls promoting their subscriptions, or it's twerking, or it's all of these things that are, like, I don't want them on my feed. They're just constantly sort of pushed to me in one way, shape, or another. Whether it's like I've started going to the gym and I'll get some gym content and then it'll be some woman squatting. And I'm like, I don't need to see that angle of you squatting. Like, why have you put that on the internet? I know what a squat looks like. There's another subconscious push for that. So if you're consuming that daily, I assume when it comes to arousal and sexual exploration, you want to find more.
Always, and then you go, and it'll get more harder and harder in terms of the intensity of it. And I want to just be really clear. I'm not a prude, and actually, I think there's a place for this stuff, and I think if people enjoy this, then great, go for it. You want to consume it, you want to subscribe to OnlyFans, then it's up to you. You want to spend your thousands of pounds on whatever, it's up to you. But what the problem I have with it is that this is accessible to our young people. The same study from 2010 that will have changed now demonstrated that 35% of 9-year-olds in the US had watched online pornography. These are huge numbers of our young people, and it's changing their brains. It is changing how they see the world. It's changing our society. So yeah, just be clear. If you want to jump on OnlyFans, and if the girls are feeling empowered by being on OnlyFans, there's lots of different conversations there about that as well, in terms of the reality of exploitation of young women by feeling like they go on OnlyFans and exploit themselves, basically, or the society exploits them in what they're choosing to do, however you might want to think about that. There's lots of, again, conversations about this that we can go backwards and forwards with, but if that's their choice, sometimes it's not their choice, but if that's their choice, then they can do, all power to them.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for this. Obviously, the content is designed for adults, and maybe your conversation you're talking about is intimacy and talking about things that you want to try, or finding boundaries essentially within your own sex life. This is things that you can explore together, right? Or you can explore and try and see if that's something that a partner's comfortable with. But your main focus is all about conversation and bringing that into essentially the bedroom, and not being typically British and prude about it, more Aussie.
Yeah, or just, yeah, absolutely. And actually realizing that once you've had this uncomfortable, in inverted commas, conversation, because I think it's only uncomfortable because we believe it will be. You will realize that actually your partner may well want more of this conversation as much as you. Maybe they don't. Maybe they struggle, and then maybe you just start gently, launching into a huge conversation out of nowhere about a big topic is pretty likely to bounce them out of the room. So it's about starting gently, and being careful and kind and listening. Some of these conversations of I want to try this and I want to try that. It's about me wanting to try this and basically you're going to support that, or and then not hearing that actually I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But let's maybe try this, or let's maybe try that instead. And it's listening, and it's listening with your body. It's listening with with what's going on in terms of all the conversations. There's also, some really interesting sort of cultural coercion stuff that happens in our worlds where there's an implied acceptance. There's interesting conversations about that are happening about consent, where somebody may well have consented to sex with their partner, but the sex was just really shit. Like they just had a really, really bad time, and so there's a feeling of being exploited by the partner, or feeling of being used, or just feeling degraded basically by this experience. But they consented. So there's this sort of cultural consent of we're in a relationship. Yeah, I'm not feeling not up for it. So let's have this experience together, and it's just not very pleasant. There's these fluid flowing conversations about where these lines are drawn are really difficult to have sometimes. But once you start with them, and you can also have the conversation about, well, I felt like I had to, or I felt like in this relationship I this happened or that happened, so therefore I thought I needed to do that or that. There's again conversations that we just need to step into.
So I mean, again, using sort of 20th century knowledge into this, it's like it didn't used to be illegal to rape your wife, right? That's quite a relatively new, well, not relatively, but still new in terms of law and legality from that point of view. Do you think things like that, I mean, like you look at LGBTQ and all of this, and the newness of this, and this it becoming less and less prudish. Are you hopeful for the future, or do you think there's a chance that it goes more and more extreme?
I think the prudishness and the sort of increase in prudishness is on the increase, and I think this is exemplified by these big tech organizations just stopping these conversations happening whilst supporting 24-hour porn. It's just the weirdest kind of contradiction. I think, I've always thought that we would, as a society, move away from that prudishness and become more and more open in those ways. But I'm not sure about it at the moment. I am very naturally a very optimistic. So friends and family will say very, very optimistic kind of guy. I'm a very glass half full, super positive about everything. This is one of the things I'm on the fence with in terms of my positivity. But happy to wrestle with as much as possible and try to. My little bit is trying to get all of my friends and teachers that I'm talking to, and schools I'm talking to, and parents I'm talking to, embrace these conversations and embrace an openness, even if it's in we're not in a position to affect or impact wider culture at this point. But what we can do is affect the culture of our own families, or the culture of our own friendships, or the culture that we create. If you're a senior leadership team in a school, you create the culture of that school. So that means that you create the environment of conversation in that as well. So I think we can, but we can create a non-prudish culture within our own relationships. And in that way we can make change better.
I think prudishness extends outside of sex though as well. Like there's a couple of viral videos I've seen recently, which is like women asking men how many tampons a girl uses in a cycle. And then when you get into the later life, it's women going through menopause and not having those conversations as partners. Oh, she's having a hot flush. This is okay. This is just part of it. It seems to just, the further and longer you go into a relationship, the more you just sort of have women and male issues in the traditional sense. Is that what happened with the second book? What was the thought process there?
The second book happened because my fabulous wife went through ovarian cancer and full hysterectomy, and so and then went straight into menopause, and then out of that, we kind of were wrestling with the changes that basically immediately happened. There was no perimenopause. It was just launched on her. And so then, and I was struggling to sort of to understand how to support her. She was struggling to sort of work out what was going on for herself. And while there may well have been information out there, we couldn't find it to help us. So we found our way through it, because we have you can imagine, we talk about everything a lot. And we found our way through it. And I thought that actually I needed to write something that was going to support blokes in this process. And that's not necessarily going through a partner who's ill and recovering, but just going, looking at friends on Facebook who are the same age as me, talking about their menopausal experiences, and knowing that their partners were going to be going, I don't know what to do. How do I help? Because that was my experience. So that's kind of where that came from originally. And the responses to that have been really positive.
Because essentially intimacy extends outside of that, right? It's all about support and holding like your partner's hand metaphorically through shitty situations. But like, I don't know, there just seems to be like a huge gap in knowledge for men around literally everything to do with women. All we were ever told is that we're from Mars or Venus, and that's essentially it. So yeah,
there is a really simple solution, is asking the question, or being vulnerable, going, I don't know what to do. I know I should be able to help you. I don't know what to do, but also not then expecting to be, she's not your line manager. It's like not expecting to be directed, because that's also just really difficult too. It's that suddenly she's dealing with herself, and then she's dealing with how to tell you what to do. But so you need to be proactive and in these conversations, and basically, I don't know what to do, but I'm trying, and I think I need to do this, and I think I need to do this, and just listening and anticipating. It's just when she's going to be feeling, and you imagine that she's going through a hot flush, and suddenly she's shivering, and then maybe she needs to carry another shirt with her, and then everywhere she goes, and then exhausted, and all these sorts of symptoms. Just imagine being that for yourself. So what do you need? Okay, I need this. I need this. I need to not have to cook dinner. I need to not have to clean the house. I need to, do all these different things. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And it's just thinking beyond yourself in different ways. But this is also, I think, in the conversations I've read, a lot of women have got to a point where they don't feel their partners are listening, so they feel like it's a waste of time, or there's one of those cultural ideas that in the house, the house domestic jobs are a women's role and not the bloke's role, and that is still a big part of a lot of relationships. So getting the guys to understand that if partner's in a difficult place, then actually they've got to step into those roles. If that's been their tradition, they have to change. Guys, you have to change, and you have to evolve, so that both of you can have a better life.
I think men and their inability to listen is a big issue when it comes to all of men's mental health issues. I think men are inherent problem solvers and want to solve problems. So based on that, what tips have you got that you sort of work? Because no one's perfect, right? It's all a test, but what works?
I think we are absolute problem solvers, but also there's that point we get to, if we don't know there's also a feeling that if we don't know the answer, we're not going to engage with the conversation as much as we might want to otherwise. And we do listen, but again, if it's an ambiguous situation where there might not be the right answer, then we also can step away from that. So again, it comes down to what I've been sort of talking about a number of times, is this fluidity of response, or fluidity of thinking or talking, where there isn't one, like, so I can help my wife today in this particular way, but by doing that tomorrow, it might be the wrong thing, because actually she's not the same person tomorrow. She won't be the same person tomorrow as she is today. So an understanding that you're not the same person today as you're going to be tomorrow, or that you were yesterday. We're 24 hours difference, and there's a whole range of different changes that we all go through. So I think we have to continue to embrace ambiguity, and actually embrace kind of the reality that there is no answer, but the action of trying to find it is what's really important. And sometimes we're going to fuck it up, like we really are going to, but that just comes with the territory. But fucking it up by doing nothing versus doing something, there's a very different element to those.
You just scared a lot of men and said there wasn't an answer, so they're all gonna
I know
now. That's it. It's not binary. We've lost all the listeners. Thanks, Ben. No, it's true, right? That doing something and trying is really important. I think that is, you don't need all the answers, and I don't know how many times I can say that. I'm just going to keep saying it and hope that it keeps going into at least one man's head, and we just keep getting better and better one man at a time. But yeah, that for me is the biggest thing, is don't do nothing, because you reduce intimacy, you reduce trust, you reduce your own self-worth, your own self-respect. You're just floating and you're not being a team or not doing anything, right? It's just do something with a sensible reason to it, I guess.
Yeah. And find somebody that you can talk to about this as well, if possible. So I've hit up a bunch of friends who, in the last year and a half, 2 years, who I could try to have a coffee with every 6 or 8 weeks, and some of them are a bit, what do you want to have coffee with me for? It's like, because I want to talk about stuff. What do you mean you want to talk about stuff? I want to talk about stuff, and then we sit down, we start talking about stuff, and they go, "All right, stuff, okay." And then suddenly, and at the end of the first conversations, for some of them, it's like, that's the most intimate, intense conversations I've ever had with a bloke. And it's like, yeah, so that's what we need to do. And then the more we do it, the more into stuff and philosophy and ideas and challenges that we get to. And then again, the more comfortable we get with having these conversations that are vulnerable. They're vulnerable. So it has to be with somebody who doesn't take the piss out of you. A challenge I have with a lot of blokes is banter. For me, banter is just sort of license to shit on your friends, and I don't do it. I can't do it. I've never been able to. So being vulnerable to somebody who's potentially going to throw it back in your face with banter is difficult. So find somebody who you don't have a bantering relationship with.
Yeah, I mean, vulnerability is an issue that there is no answer to. There's biological reasoning as to why men can't be super vulnerable with other men, and I think it adds to the loneliness pandemic. That is, finding the right person to open up to is really, really hard. But if you do find that person, it's really, really good. And to be honest with you, it's a really good way of getting rid of shitty mates, because if you do it and it comes back, they're not your guy. They're not your guy.
I wish we had more conversations about dumping friends who aren't of value to you, or you're not of value to them. I think this is part of the conversations with young blokes I have, where if one of your mates is sexually harassing a girl, why aren't you having a go at them? Or why are they one of your friends? Oh, well, because they're mates. It's like, well, you've got the wrong mate. If that's not what you believe in, if you've challenged this friend in terms of their behaviour and they don't change, then why are you still friends? And there's this just really interesting sort of look on people's faces of, what do you mean, why are you still friends? What you mean, get rid of your friends? It's like, yeah, move on. It's like, why we got this life? Why are we spending it with people who are drain on us, or who are doing things that we fundamentally disagree with, or who won't listen to us, or we say something vulnerable to them and then they throw it back at us? Because there's also some evidence out there that the idea that guys don't talk isn't actually true. That before a lot of guys have taken their lives, they have reached out, but what's happening is that they're not being listened to.
Yeah.
And whether that's their friends aren't hearing it, or maybe they're putting it in such a non-direct way that their friends don't hear it, but they're not being heard. And so I think we do. I don't necessarily think it's true that we don't talk. What I think is true is that people have taken on the idea that guys don't talk, so that when a guy is talking, they're not listening, and they're not hearing what's being, the cry for help that's being out there.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think men don't talk. I think men don't listen. I think men try and find solutions to problems that they can't solve, and that creates more issues and more problems and more friction. And that's where I see the actual issue is we can't listen. And I'm guilty of it too. I've literally sat in conversations where people are telling me something and I'm like, I can tell them how to fix this, and then I'm like, no, that's not. You just listen, and it's like it's hard. It is really, really hard to listen properly and effectively. But we're working. We're not. No one's perfect. That's the big thing here.
Yeah,
In
and I
regards,
just want to be really clear. I'm not shitting on blokes either. Neither of us are. You know, we're works in progress. But it's just a reality that we're finding ourselves in.
yeah, there's 4 billion men on this world. I'm definitely not in the top 1%. So don't worry on anything. So listen, but yeah, take it with a pinch of salt for sure. In regards to the men's space and well-being and stuff like you're doing with education in regards to sex and all of those things, what do you see that's doing really well, and what do you want to see more of?
I, I, I think that there are a lot of guys out there trying really hard, and actually, there are a lot of guys out there who are looking for support from other blokes. And I'm actually really positive about. So we talked about the negative online space that's sort of giving us these binary ideas of what guys and men and women should be. I think, and there's a sort of a lament that there aren't blokes out there doing the opposite. I think they are. But I think they're in our worlds. They're in our schools. They're parents. They're family, and they're just quietly getting on with trying to be better. Because I think this is another thing of I think the vast majority of guys want to be better. They want to get it right. They want to get better. So I'm actually really positive that we're out there. The 95% of blokes who are trying really hard and trying to be better are just quiet. And actually, what I want to happen is for them to stand up. You know, the 95% of lads in a school who don't do the harassing and the commentary. My comment to them is, stand up. If you stand up to this small percentage of guys who are involved in this, it'll stop. Change the culture. So I think what we need to do is learn how to stand up and be more vocal for ourselves.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's a solid point for sure. Bully the bully, like that's the best way of doing it. Not like, but yeah. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed our conversation. I will leave the final thoughts with yourself and let people know where they can find your book or yourself if they want to hear more.
The book is on Amazon. Both books are on Amazon. So it's Intimacy, a guide for young men about sex, and Men and Menopause, a guide for the bewildered. I have a website. You can contact me through that.